if you want to know how to get your drawing to go from this to this, I'll give you some ideas in this video on what you can focus on that can really create a lot of depth and focus in your illustration. So I started off this drawing. It was essentially a environment piece that I was doing, but I wanted to add these characters into it, so I ended up cropping it and kind of trying to fit them in like this. Now, this point in the illustration, it wasn't really bringing the attention to where I wanted it to. One, there's nothing, like you see the character's eyes, but they're looking over here. I hadn't added in anything yet. I had an idea to put a frog there. I didn't do that. But then what I noticed was that you were looking kind of in this area. If you just immediately look at this drawing, your eyes are kind of brought to there. And the reason for this is because this area has the most contrast. The brightest brights and the darkest darks are actually in this point right here. So I ended up moving the characters up so they would be a bit more in that light, but still here there's a few issues that are going on. So the most contrast is pretty much this fish right here, which I do want to be a focal point, but I also want the characters to be a focal point as well. So one thing I did already was I made the background blurry. This is a kind of easy way to bring a lot of depth and focus into your drawing, but it's not always needed, and I'm gonna talk you through a few things to focus on so you don't always actually have to add the blur. I just personally liked it. So what's wrong with this right now is that since the characters, I want them to be in focus, but they're not. So what is causing them to not be in focus? So the first thing I want you to focus on is contrast. Now, the points where you want people to look should have the most contrast. You can do this in a variety of different ways, but the most important thing is your value contrast. So the darkest darks and the brightest brights should be on the parts that you want in focus. So how will we do this? You can simply just darken them like this. Now, what I've also done is, since it's a drawing, you can kind of do what you want, and the background doesn't have to be entirely realistic. So if you don't want to make these characters darker, you can make the background brighter. So in the drawing I have here, you can see that I actually just brightened the background, and you can see the hair color doesn't actually change by that much. So I just made the background brighter, and this brings your attention to the character's face. This is one of the liberties you have as an artist, so feel free to take those liberties whenever you can. Now, another thing that you want to focus on, this is more to do with having the character feel like it's in the environment, is the shadows and how the characters affect the environment. You have to think, anytime you put a character into an environment, the environment will change. It's gonna affect the lighting in there and everything else. So a few things you can focus on. Cast shadows are the most important thing with having a character look like it's in the environment instead of looking like it's a sticker. So if we go to this one, you can kind of see in certain areas, like down here, there's no light getting in there. That's because the characters will be blocking it and they're casting a shadow onto it. Other things to think about with these are kind of making your characters look like they're in the environment, is having the light bounce around. Now you see on their faces here, they've got this like orange glow. So the light would be coming down like this, right? And it's hitting his hand, and that light is bouncing off and hitting their faces in kind of these parts right here. So this bounce light, it can be very subtle, but it also adds such a big impact. You can see I've done a little bit of reflection on the stone right here, and it just it's showing that the characters and the environment are both interacting with each other. If a character doesn't really fit the environment in terms of the colors, try adding a few of the colors of the environment onto the characters. So this comes in bounce light and ambient light. You can see over on this side I've added these kind of white parts here, which in my head there's just like a faint light coming from this side of the page. It might not even make sense, but it just adds a bit of that environment onto the character. This rim light that I've kind of added also is just a nice way to separate the characters from the background, because if you go back to here, you can see that the characters in some points, especially the hair, they just blend into the background because these are actually almost the same color. So you just need to separate the silhouette from the background to make more depth. The next thing I want you to focus on is saving your rendering for the focal points. There's no point of actually rendering out your whole image if you only want them to look in certain areas. It will save you a lot of time, and it can look just as effective at making your illustration look detailed if you just leave those leave the rendering for the parts that you want in focus. So I've mainly rendered the faces and fish and anywhere that's kind of in between the light and where the light goes to shadow. That is a great way to make the whole image look a lot more detailed than it actually is. The next and last thing I'll talk about in this video is just to add or think about how there's a background, midground, and foreground in your drawing. So adding elements in each of those can just create more depth. You don't always have to have foreground, midground, and a background, but just to know that they're there and put them in when you can. Now, I think the most depth will obviously include all three of them, but depending on your goals, you can usually get away with just two, the foreground and the background, which is kind of what I've done in this. But you can see that certain elements like that plant and the lanterns kind of at the top, they're just separating the foreground from the background, and you can see that the one in the back has it's a bit more blurry, it's out of focus. It's just to separate those planes. A way you can make things look further away is to lower the contrast in those areas. So if you had something that you wanted to be in focus, right, we'll just take the three, the shadow, the mid-tone, and the highlight, and something that you want to be in focus would kind of look like this, where you'd have very strong contrast between how dark it is and how bright it gets. So if you were to have something like that and it was repeating, so it's the same, say this was like a bowl or something, and you wanted to make that bowl look like it was further away, you could take these colors and you'd essentially just lower that contrast range. So kind of bring it all up. So this would be the darkest dark, the mid would be just a little brighter, and the highlight would be just a little brighter than that. So this makes it less eye-catching and it pushes it back, because the further things go in the background, the less contrast they're gonna have. So we can do the same thing if it was like really far back, where it would just be like something like this, and just very, very far back, maybe a little darker. I always used to think it was things in the background get brighter, but that was wrong. It's the contrast gets smaller. You can also do this with darks as well. So if something's dark, you can make it just a little brighter. And these same three things could, all in different areas and different contexts, be the same exact thing. But you want to save your darkest darks for areas like this. And also with the rendering, you want to add the most variation in colors. So in the background, you could just leave it as shadow, midtone, and highlight, or not even a highlight, but just like the light, I guess. And in your focal points, you can put all that like in between stuff and make it a lot more complex, because another way to add depth is just to add more in between tones between your shadows and your lights. So when you're thinking about things that you want to be in focus, they should look a lot more like this one at the top. And then as things get further away, you can just take away the contrast bit by bit. Anyways, I hope these help. They have been helping me a lot with my drawings, and it's just something that I've been focusing a lot to bring my pieces from something like this to something more like this. I'll probably keep working on this as well. There are a few things I'd like to change, but just I think there's a big difference, and it's not that much harder to get an image from here to here. You just need to know what to focus on. So I really hope this helps, and if you have any ideas or thoughts about it to maybe share with other people, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear them, and I'm sure other people would as well. So thank you for watching. Bye.